Hey, everybody, welcome. Glad that you're here tonight. We're going to have yet another great late night conversation. We're going to talk about a number of different topics. Yeah, hope that you're all having a good day. We're in the heat of the summer. It is mid July. And yeah, let's jump right into it.
Of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Hey, everybody, welcome. Glad that you're here tonight. We're going to have yet another great late night chat, like we always do. So first we'll be doing my opening remarks. Then from there, we'll do the roll call. And then after that, I will answer your questions for the remainder of the show. So if there's something you would like for me to answer in the second half of the show, the best thing for you to do is go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. Send your questions. Super chats can also be done. We're monetized. You can do Rumble rants if you're watching the Rumble. Buy Me a Coffee is my preferred way of donating, but, send a question. Give me something to talk about in the second half of the show. Now, the announcement we've got is that our organization, the Center for Political Innovation, is having its national gathering, its national convention in Chicago on August 15th. It's going to be a great, great, great time had by all. And I'm really, really looking forward to it. So I hope that you will join us. The link to register for the convention is down below. You can also register here. The link is in the chat. The link is down below. Register and join us at the convention. We would really, really love to have you. So make a point of being there August 15th in Chicago. It's going to be a really, really great time had by all. We are building a movement. The Center for Political Innovation. We're not part of the left and we're not part of the right. We are optimistic and hopeful, and we have a vision for a new America beyond globalism and imperialism, a new America with a government of action that fights for working families. Join the movement. Time to organize. This is us. Yeah, that's us. We are the Center for Political Innovation, and we are building a very, very exciting organization and movement in this country. And we seek to educate people and to build a movement, because the only thing that's going to get us out of the nightmare currently unfolding is a movement of working people against imperialism. That's what we're all about. So register for the convention, join the Center for Political Innovation. Yeah, so I'm going to do a slideshow for my opening remarks tonight. So if you've got something you would like me to talk about in the second half of our program, the way we do it, first I give my opening remarks. There'll be a slideshow. I do want to comment on a couple current events, and then we'll do a roll call. We'll find out who's watching, who's on the other side of the camera. And then I will answer your questions for the remainder of the show. So if there's something you would like me to talk about in the second half of the show, send me a super chat. Go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. Rumble rants, etc. We're always here to answer people's questions. So glad that you're here. And yeah, so, one question that often comes up is, could the United States actually have a revolution? And now that there is all this talk on the internet about socialism and communism, with which I no longer identify, right? We view innovationism as a separate movement, right? We draw from Marxism to some degree or other, but we also see the limits of the Marxist worldview and philosophy, and that we are anti-imperialists and anti-globalists. And I will get into our perspective tonight. But this question of could a revolution actually happen? How do we get from here to a new America where working families are no longer struggling and the imperialist globalist system is no longer dominating the world, including our country? What does this all mean? So I thought I would just do a PowerPoint slideshow tonight to address that. Just get right into it. So how could a revolution actually happen in the USA? Fair question, isn't it? Right? If you're talking about building a movement, if you're talking about challenging the system, how could you actually win? And it's interesting that, even though this seems like a pretty basic question for anybody who is doing that kind of politics, I remember being in a room with a group of communists, and someone new had just joined the organization, and they'd asked, "What's the plan for the revolution? How are we going to make the revolution?" And they laughed. And then they said, "Oh, I remember when I was his age, that was the first question I asked." I remember thinking, what in the world is wrong with you guys? That's obviously, if someone's becoming a communist, one of the first questions that they should have is, what's the plan to actually make the communist revolution? But that shows how kind of completely out of touch a lot of these communist groups are. But, we are innovationists. We have entered a new stage in our anti-globalist and anti-imperialist perspective. And we see kind of the limitations of communism. But we're going to get into this question. How could a revolution actually happen? How could America get to a place where it's no longer part of globalism, imperialism, and instead we're building up working families, and we have a society where the needs of the people come first, not the profits of huge multinational corporations? What could actually be done in that direction? Well, in order to even begin to answer that question, we must separate Marxist spirituality from Marxist economics. And that is really one of the most important things to do when engaging with these topics, because nothing makes sense in our time. And nowadays, there are various communist and socialist groups out there: Democratic Socialists of America, Party for Socialism and Liberation, Communist Party USA, Revolutionary Communist Party out there. And what they're saying doesn't really make any sense from an economic perspective, because they are loyal to the spiritual side of Marxism, and they've completely neglected the economics. And that in our time, probably the most defining aspect of why political conversation is so confusing is that Marxist spirituality and Marxist economics are almost completely separated. In the 20th century, to some degree or other, Marxist spirituality and Marxist economics were the same, and were in the same movement. That is no longer the case. And at this point, there are two contradictory spirits combined into one single ideology called Marxism. And what am I talking about? Well, Karl Marx lived from 1818 to 1883 in a period where the word revolution was very popular. Feudalism, the system of serfs and nobles, landowners and peasants, was being overthrown and being replaced with the modern world in Europe, the free market system, the human rights, Declaration of the Rights of Man, the ideology of liberalism that celebrates the rights of the individual above all else. The collective West, as we come to know it, was coming into existence. And that was the time period in which Karl Marx lived. And one of the biggest moments of Karl Marx's life was the Spring of Nations in 1848, when there were over 200 different uprisings all across Europe. And Karl Marx was a German, and he lived in Germany. And in 1848, they had the Spring of Nations and the German Revolution that failed. And Marx's organization, the Communist Party or the Communist League, was part of the 1848 German Revolution, and the Communist Manifesto was written for the 1848 German Revolution. Marx was living in the time period in which feudalism was being toppled and liberalism, the system we now live under, liberalism, the free market capitalist economic system, liberal democratic governments, nation states, democratic republics were coming into existence. What this was the aristocracy, the nobility, the old ruling class, the old gentry and aristocrats being toppled by those who have the wealth, by the landowners, the capitalists, the owners of business, banking, factories, etc. And revolutions were being waged to displace the old feudal system and replace it with capitalism. And in fact, the word revolution itself comes out of the struggle against the Catholic Church. Where does the word revolution come from? You can look this up. It's actually very fascinating. The word revolution comes from the fact that Copernicus discovered that the earth is not the center of the universe, that the earth revolves around the sun. And that was considered a great crime, a great heresy, because at the time, the Catholic Church was the ruling institution. And the Catholic Church said that it was the sun revolving around the earth, that the earth was the center of the universe. And Copernicus, the scientist, he wrote this document, this book called On the Revolution of Heavenly Spheres, arguing that the sun, that the heavenly spheres revolve, right? That the earth revolves around the sun. And it was a great, great crime to write what he wrote, because it was going against the prevailing teaching of the Catholic Church, which was the primary institution of feudalism. And people who believed what Copernicus believed, that the earth was not the center of the universe, that in fact the earth revolved around the sun, were called revolutionaries. And to be a revolutionary meant that you rejected the feudal order and you believed in science, and you believed that people had the right to engage in scientific research and come to conclusions that went against what the church said. That's where the word revolution comes from. And in fact, it wasn't really for a couple hundred years after the word became popular that people even applied it to politics. Revolutionaries were a certain strand of scientific thought, people who believed certain things about astronomy. And later, in Britain, they started talking about revolutions. The word revolution just literally means to turn around. And they started talking about turnaround as a political event. A great turnaround in politics would be the overthrow of the existing order, a turnaround. And later we had the French Revolution, right? It was a big turnaround in France. So even the word revolution comes from this. And amid the upsurge to create the collective West and establish liberalism, Karl Marx began critiquing the new economic system that was coming into existence called capitalism. Marx's spiritual attachment to the left and his economic discoveries are highly incompatible. And that's something that many dogmatic Marxists will vehemently disagree. And that's something that many believers in capitalism will vehemently disagree with it. But it's true. On the one hand, Marx was a member of the left. After the French Revolution, the people that were still loyal to the king sat on the right side of the National Assembly, and the people that were still, that were embracing the overthrow and the revolution, the more radical folks, the Jacobins, they sat on the left. And so the left was associated with this movement to bring down and overthrow feudalism and fight for the rights of man, liberté, égalité, fraternity, life, liberty, and property, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All of that was the spirit of the age. And Marx was one of these people, and he participated in these revolutions, not just in Germany in 1848, but he was on the streets of Paris in 1851 as part of the uprisings that happened there. And Marx spent his life involved in revolutionary movements built by the left, of people that had been mobilized, inspired by the French Revolution, trying to expand its tradition. And he spiritually attached himself to that movement. At the same time, though, he was studying the economic system that had come into existence out of these revolutions, and he was writing a critique of them. And what Marx wrote about economics and what Marx attached himself to spiritually and philosophically don't line up. And nothing in our current political order makes any sense unless you acknowledge that. Until we acknowledge that Marx's spirituality and Marx's economics don't line up and don't match, we really can't understand why politics in our time is so confusing. Spiritually, Marx believed in a philosophy he invented called dialectical materialism. He said that all that exists is the material plane, with emotions, thoughts, and ideas all simply reflecting it in a physical thing called a brain or thinking matter. Thought is inseparable from matter that thinks. The only reason you have thoughts is because you have a piece of thinking matter in your head called a brain. And matter, then Marx went on to say, is defined by conflict, contradiction, and advancing toward a higher plane. So all that exists is matter. There's no spirits, there's no God, there's no passion, there's no emotion. The feelings that you have are just a reflection of the material world. They're just your material thing, your material head, your brain, which is a piece of thinking matter, right? There is no spirituality. There's nothing beyond the material world. And the material world is constantly in conflict, clashing with itself. And that is what drives forward history. Dialectics is conflict driving forward history, as invented by Hegel, the philosopher. Materialism is the belief that matter is all that exists. And that was the philosophy that Marx developed, which is very much embracing the spirit of the age. Under feudalism, people were told that they were the property. They were the property of their natural superiors, the king, the landowner, etc. That's who they were subservient to, and that was defined by God, and the king had divine right to rule over them because he got his authority from God, and that there was no struggle and there was no conflict. Well, Marx came along and said there is no God, there is no spirituality. All that exists is matter, and conflict is good. Conflict is the motive force of history, and it's the exact opposite of what they were teaching in feudalism. Makes sense, right? And Marx was involved in a period in which the overthrow of feudalism was the defining order of the day. And so he developed an ideology that was the antithesis of feudalism. Feudalism defines everything in terms of spirituality. Marx denies spirituality. Feudalism says there is no struggle. There's just order and balance, and everyone must know their place. Marx is saying conflict and rebellion and struggle define reality itself. That's dialectical materialism. Well, dialectical materialism and the left that Marx was spiritually wedded to appeals to the Oedipal impulses that everyone has. Each child has a desire to rebel against their parents and assert their individual personhood. That's part of what it means to be human, especially as you get to be a teenager. You want to kill your parents because your parents are holding back your individuality, and that you're transitioning from being the property of your parents and depending on them as a child to being your own person. And so we all have an Oedipal desire to rebel against our parents. And in the French Revolution, the rebellion was very much, it was an Oedipal explosion. The king was the father of the nation, and they cut his head off. The king was a tyrant, and they chopped his head off, right? And they killed their father, right? And it was everyone's desire to rebel against unjust authority being released. And the left that came out of the French Revolution appealed to people's desire to rebel against authority, to tear down oppressors. Furthermore, it appealed to people's libido. Sexual passion, rage, and violence are connected in one-to-one impulse. And society restricts our ability to express anger, to act in a sexual way and engage in violence, right? We have marriage, right? The idea is you can't just have sex with whoever you want. You marry somebody, you can have sex with them. In primitive societies, and even some places today, having sex with somebody you're not married to is considered a very serious crime. And even today, right? You can't express the anger that you feel all the time, right? If you tell your boss to go fuck himself, you might get fired from your job. And so you have to restrain your anger. And especially when it comes to physical violence, you can't be physically violent, right? That the state maintains a monopoly on violence, right? You can't punch somebody. You can't shoot somebody, right? You have to restrain your desire to be violent. And that society as it currently exists and has always existed kind of negotiates people limiting their libido, right? You can't just be sexual however you feel like. You got to restrain your sexual passion. You got to restrain your anger, and you got to restrain your violent impulses, right? Well, part of the left that Marx spiritually attached himself to was telling people to unleash their anger, unleash their sexual desires, unleash their desire to commit violence, right? And that the French Revolution and many of these uprisings were people that had been told not to rebel, going out and rebelling, and people that had been told, to hold in their anger, letting their rage out onto society, and people that had been told to restrain their sexual behavior, having orgies and free love and being wildly sexual. And that was a big part of the revolutionary spirit of the age. It was basically to create a social explosion and bring down feudalism. The emerging capitalist class was giving people permission to unleash their Oedipal desire and kill their oppressor, kill the tyrant, kill the authority, and unleash their rage, unleash their sexual passion, unleash their desire to commit violence, their aggression, right? And that's the left, right? And dialectical materialism was this philosophy Marx developed that was the ultimate expression of the left. There is no God, so the church is just an institution set up to kind of brainwash you to obey. And conflict defines reality, so of course you can unleash your rage, and of course you can go out and rebel, because conflict is what drives history forward. So rebel, 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 fight, fight, fight. Right? Dialectical materialism was Marx's philosophy, and Marx was a left Hegelian. And within the 1848 Spring of Nations and other events, he developed a worldview that was the ultimate expression of the left, right? Why is it that the left uses the color red, right? It was during the French Revolution. The people that were supporters of the Jacobins, the radical faction of the French Revolution, wore red caps. Why? Well, red is a color of what? Blood, for violence. It's a color of anger, right? You're red with anger. It's also a color of sexual passion. And the French Revolution was an explosion of anger and sexual passion and violence. And red, eventually, the left adopted the red flag. Red became the color associated with the left. And that's really, spiritually, this is what the left is. And it made perfect sense, because they were overthrowing feudalism. And the left was the antidote to feudalism, right? If feudalism is a society where you can't have anger, you can't show anger, you can't have sexual passion, your sexual passion is heavily restricted, your ability to rebel or challenge authority is heavily restricted. If it's defined on the basis of religion, you must obey your natural superiors because they have divine right from God. Well, if you come along and you say there is no God, there is no natural superior, there is no authority, there is no spirituality at all that exists is matter and conflict, fight, 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 rebel, rebel, rebel. That's how history is driven forward. That's how you take apart feudalism. And Marx, very much as part of that movement, very much embodied that. And that was Marx's spiritual view. However, as Marx studied economics, he came up with economic theories that, if you look at what they actually say, completely do not line up with his spirituality. Marx basically saw that coming out of the feudal system, the feudal caste system was being replaced by two social groups: the wage laborers and the owners, the proletarians and the capitalists, the bourgeoisie and the proletarians, those who own the factories and major centers of economic power and land, and those who sell their labor power, wage laborers who rent themselves out. And in this new system, production is carried out for the benefit of private owners, right? The private owners of those factories want to make as much money as they possibly can. The owner of the land wants to make as much money from the land, growing crops, as he possibly can. He maximizes profits. And this leads to chaos, because different capitalists are looking to maximize their profits. They want to churn out as many products as possible. They want to pay workers as little as they possibly can. They want to make the highest payout. And this is Marx, he called it the anarchy of production. And it leads to very unnatural problems like glut. Never before in history had there been a problem of glut, right? The idea that, people would lose their jobs and the economy would come to a standstill because too much wealth has been produced, that never existed before. People were never homeless because there were too many houses. People were never hungry because there was too much food. They tell the story of the coal miner's riddle. The little boy says to his father, "Why is it so cold?" The father says, "Because I can't afford to buy any coal to heat the stove." The little boy says to his father, why can't you afford to buy any coal to heat the stove? He said, "Because I got laid off from my job at the coal mine. I'm unemployed." And he says, "Why did you get laid off from your job at the coal mine?" He says, "Because there is too much coal." Right? Poverty created by abundance. There's an abundance of coal, so the coal miner loses his job, right? There are too many houses, so the housing bubble burst. Americans can't afford to keep buying homes, and there's loads of homes across America, so the housing bubble bursts and the U.S. economy crashes in 2008. Poverty created by abundance, right? Abundance and vast wealth in society causes huge amounts of poverty. That doesn't make sense, but that's called glut. And the U.S. government, the Department of Agriculture, buys loads and loads of cheese every year and buries it in a cave to stabilize the prices and keep the farms from going out of business. And there are many examples of this, but this is an ever-present problem. And as technology advances, it gets worse. As technology replaces human beings, as the role of human beings in production gets smaller and smaller and smaller, because machines can do almost anything, that leads to a situation where the ability of workers to buy back what they produce is decreased, and the rate of profit on each item goes down because you can only extract profit from the labor power put into it. And so the more efficient production becomes, the poorer everyone gets. Marx wrote about this. He called it overproduction. We call it value crisis. And as technology advances, the economy becomes more and more unstable. You have panics and crashes. And as technology becomes more and more efficient, and it becomes more and more efficient and easier to create lots and lots of wealth, the result is you have poorer and poorer people. And ultimately, the only way the anarchy of production, the chaos of the market, can be resolved is for the wage workers, who are the majority, to seize control of the government and use the government to centralize the means of production, so that this problem no longer exists. And we can have a rationally organized economy where we're producing based on need and based on the overall interests of society, not just whatever happens to be profitable to private owners. And as a result, society can keep getting wealthier and growth can be unrestrained and unlimited. Now, what Marx advocates there, that's not a desire for chaos. He's saying the system is chaotic and he's going to bring stability, and that the majority of people need to come together and bring order to this very, very chaotic world and abolish the anarchy of production and institute what Frederick Engels called production upon a predetermined plan. Marx's economics is spiritually the opposite of what his spiritual theories are. His spiritual theories, he wants ruthless criticism of all that exists. He wants constant struggle and rebellion. And his economic theories are saying we want order, we want stability, and that capitalism is creating anarchy. And what we need is to centrally plan the means of production, and all of society must function as one, right? Instead of having competing interests, right, where everyone does their own thing, we should have the economy organized centrally in the interest of everybody, in the interest of the whole group. As the revolutions that Marx was participating in wanted individual rights, the right to pick your own religion, the right to freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, the right of the individual. But Marx's economic theories are emphasizing the collective, right? And that we need to get rid of individualism in the economic sphere, and we need to centralize the economy and have the economy work for the collective, for the good of all of society. Right. So there is a contradiction here. And this is really, really important. And you're not going to understand why our current political mess doesn't make any sense unless you understand that. Marx's spirituality, as part of the left, seeks chaos, rebellion, and disorder. It taps into resentment, envy, anger, and offers libidinal and Oedipal satisfaction as the insertion of individual freedom to not be restrained by society. Whereas Marxist economics seeks order, stability, and community. The anarchy of production is to be abolished and replaced with a rational system. Human beings are then enabled to function in a more cooperative and less competitive manner. Marxist economics is almost forgotten in Western countries, though widely understood in the BRICS world and utilized to build an organized society. All right, if you ever see a young communist or socialist, you ever see a literature table for the Party for Socialism and Liberation or the Democrat Socialists of America or the Revolutionary Communist Party, walk up to the table and say, what's the tendency of the falling rate of profit? And you will hear crickets. Walk up to that table and say, explain the problem of overproduction in capitalism. Crickets. They've never heard of this stuff. They've never heard of Marx's economic theories. right? They know there's two classes, the worker and the capitalist, and it's unfair, and we need rebellion and to tear down the rich people and abolish billions. They know that. They got the spiritual side. They have no idea about the economics. They don't know what overproduction is. In fact, they'll probably tell you that overproduction is just creating too much, right? And the capitalists, yeah, they just want more and more and more. They want endless growth. Well, no, actually. Marx said growth is good, but capitalism has this problem where the anarchy of production gets in the way and growth leads to an economic fallout, and we need to centralize the economy to have endless growth. They don't know that. I mean, Marxist economics in the West is almost completely forgotten. You can find it in the work, the books that I recommend to understand Marxist economics that are available in English. You read old stuff from back in the days of Stalin, right? Old Communist Party literature from the 1930s. Go read Dialectical Economics by Lynn Marcus. That'll tell you about overproduction and the tendency of the falling rate of profit, right? Go read Low Wage Capitalism by Fred Goldstein. That'll tell you all about it. Go read High Tech Low Pay by Sam Marcy. That'll tell you all about it. Right? Go read The Future is Up to Us by Nelson Peary. That'll tell you all about it. Go read Fascism and Social Revolution by R. Palm Dutt. That'll tell you all about it. But you will not find this stuff. Richard Wolff never talks about it. No. Richard Wolff, it's all just the workers, the workers and the capitalists, and you listen to Mamdani, and you listen to Bernie Sanders, and you listen to all these socialists out there. None of them ever talk about what Marx talked about in terms of economics. They talk about there's the worker, there's most people, and then there's the billionaires, and it's no fair. They talk about, oh, these capitalists want all this growth, and growth is bad. It's going to destroy the environment. Marx never said that, right? They never talk about this stuff. Well, I talk about it, and I've studied this stuff, and they talk about it extensively in China, right? And if you go and read publications of the Communist Party of China, they talk about this in great detail. And if you go to Russia and you talk to economists there, they talk about it, right? And if you read what was written by Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il, they talk about it, right? And if you read what Marxist and communist groups say on the African continent, you read what's been put out by the World Anti-Imperialist Platform, they talk about overproduction and the tendency of the falling rate of profit. American Marxists have never even heard of it. It doesn't exist as far as they're concerned. They've completely forgotten about Marxist economics. And in fact, in the BRICS countries, many of these countries are not Marxist. Iran, for example, they don't believe in Marxism, but they know all about the tendency of the falling rate of profit. They know all about the Leninist theory of imperialism, and they centrally plan their economy to make sure they don't have these problems. And modern Russia, right? They reject Marxism. They're Orthodox Christian nationalists. They follow Putin and the new Russian patriotism. They have a lot of Muslims, and but you go to Russia. I've met with economists in Russia at the big universities. They know all about this. They talk about it extensively. They know all about it in Russia. And they don't even believe in communism in Russia. The Communist Party does, but the most of the political system there doesn't. But they know all about this stuff. They hold on to Marxist economics. They've rejected the spiritual side. Whereas in the West, all we have is the spiritual side of Marxism, and there's a complete rejection of the Marxist economics. In the BRICS world, the governments largely understand that they are centralizing the means of production in order to overcome the anarchy of production and make sure that they have long-term economic growth. And the Chinese government is constantly putting out growth reports, and they're constantly organizing things, and they have 5-year plans. Their understanding is we can't have the anarchy of production. We got to plan our economy and centralize the means of production on behalf of all society, right? That's the Chinese 5-year plan song that I've played on these streams many times. That's what they're all about. Whereas in the West, various communist groups, this is not on their radar screen at all. They understand that there's a bunch of evil people in power, and they're oppressors, and they're holding us down, and we want to cut their heads off and let out our rage and kill them and beat them down, and we want to have sex, and we want to have all kinds of sex and kill and stab and let out our anger. But they have never heard of any of this. All right? They have embraced the Marxist spirituality full on, but they have completely forgotten and don't even know Marxist economics. Whereas in the BRICS world, they've rejected the spirituality of Marxism. Right? You go to China, it's a communist government, Marxist-Leninist ideology, Mao Zedong thought, Deng Xiaoping theory, but they're not telling people to rise up and overthrow. They're preaching loyalty to the country. They emphasize traditional family values. You can be rewarded in a Chinese university if you visit your grandparents, right? That's not very Marxist, right? You're reinforcing the family, making young people go visit their grandparents. Yes, right? And that Confucius, right? There's big statues of Confucius in modern China. Mao is alongside of Confucius. But I mean, they emphasize tradition. You go to North Korea. Are they telling people to rise up and overthrow and tear things down? No, they're telling people we are the Korean people and we need growth. And the spiritual side of Marxism has been largely rejected by the rising countries of the BRICS world, but they thoroughly understand the economics. Whereas the spiritual side of Marxism, the spirit of rebellion, is the primary method that Western countries use to attack the BRICS world. And if you go, when the USA is trying to destabilize Nicaragua, what do? They get a whole bunch of angry teenagers out there pumped up with social media, and they say, oh, Daniel Ortega lives in a palace, and you got to tear him down and cut off his head and let out your rage and anger. And don't you want gay marriage? And don't you want abortion? And women are held. And if you look at the color revolution attempts they've done in Nicaragua, they use the spirituality of Marxism, feminism, LGBT, libidinal, Oedipal rage. That's what they do. In Iran, when they're trying to destabilize Iran, what do? The young people that go out and riot and try to overthrow the Islamic Republic, what do? They're using the spirituality of Marxism, Oedipal, libidinal, rage, anger, resentment, envy, all of that. And in fact, the spirituality of Marxism is something that the BRICS countries are actively trying to fight against. They don't want their young people to go out and burn things. They don't want that spirit of rebellion. They want to defend the traditional family, etc. And so we're in a weird moment where basically Western Marxists have completely abandoned Marxist economics, and they have no understanding of the anarchy of production, of the tendency of the falling rate of profit, etc. For them, socialism, let's just talk about Western Marxists here. I guess that's the next point, right? So in America, if you see various Marxist and socialist groups, what you're seeing is people that embrace the spirituality, the spiritual aspect of Marxism. That's what you're seeing. They all embrace it to some degree or other. They never talk about the anarchy of production. They never talk about the tendency of the falling rate of profit. For them, socialism means worker cooperatives. That's Richard Wolff. That's his big thing. The workers should own, they should be shareholders in the company. Well, that's, and then the company still operates according to profit. That's not centralizing the means of production. And you still have overproduction, and you still have companies competing with each other. And that's not resolving the issue. Just because the workers are themselves shareholders and get a share of the profits, that doesn't resolve the problems. That doesn't matter. It's not about resolving the anarchy of production. It's just about there's workers and there's capitalists, and that's unfair. Aren't you really, really mad? Tear it down. It's just a spiritual thing, right? Or what else, right? It's a welfare state. Well, welfare and government spending happens in every system. And this is one of my biggest pet peeves, right? Every society redistributes wealth to some degree or other, right? The roads have to be paved by somebody. The postal service that delivers your mail has to get paid somehow, right? And that taxing people and using the money to create social programs to try and stabilize the economy is what every government that has ever existed does. That has nothing to do with socialism versus capitalism. But that's what we think it is. Mamdani is a socialist because he wants to raise the taxes on rich people in order to give us free buses. Well, many countries have had free bus systems before that are fully capitalist, right? But we're told Mamdani is a communist because he wants to give us free buses. We're told that, that Obamacare is communism because it's the government not even nationalizing or asserting state control, but just kind of facilitating the private healthcare system. Well, that's the government involved in healthcare. It's communism. No, that's just managing capitalism, which is something that goes on in every capitalist society. There are just different ways of doing it, right? The post office is not socialism. The fire department is not socialism. Social Security, Medicare, none of that is socialism. All of that is managing capitalism. It is the state managing capitalism, which it always does, right? If there's not roads, how are the capitalists who own the stores going to sell products if no one can drive on the roads and get to the store, right? If there's no electricity in the city, how are the capitalists who own the factory going to turn on their machines, right? So they need to have utilities, right? A lot of times they're private utilities, but the state still sets them up and facilitates them, even if they're private, right? The state intervention in the economy is just a natural part of the capitalist system. But in America, we believe, and neoliberalism, right? The neoliberal ideology has taught us all that if the government does anything, that's communism. And Mao killed 100 gajillion million people, so you have to be against it. And that's just silliness. That's just complete and utter silliness. Now, in addition to that, some of these Marxist and socialist groups, they don't want worker cooperatives. They don't just want a welfare state. It sounds like if you really press them, what they want is some kind of authoritarian state based on their progressive principles. They want a government that will take power and correct historic injustices, and implement their kind of agenda of, tearing down the privileged, correcting histories of injustice or whatever. And that's a lot of these different groups. If you listen to them, they're not talking about some kind of new economic system. They're talking about, they want a government that believes in feminism and anti-racism, et cetera, right? The Revolutionary Communist Party, the RCP, that wrote a new constitution for America. You read it, there's very little in there about society controlling the means of production. It's mainly focused on, we think America is racist and we're going to have a government that gets rid of that racism. We believe that women are oppressed. We are going to have a government that works against that. It's almost like just they kind of have progressive ideas and they want them forcibly implemented with the state. It's not even an economic question. Generally, in America, people who call themselves communists, the most common view is the view that you get from Democratic Socialists of America, Committees of Correspondence for Democracy and Socialism, the Communist Party USA. It's the progressive majority road to socialism. It's that the Democrats will get elected and the Republicans will just go away, and gradually the Democrats will become more and more radical and create a national health care plan and, implement transgender everything, and we'll give reparations to Black people, and we'll name all the streets after Native Americans, and we'll tax the billionaires, and we'll stop using coal, and we'll stop using nuclear power, and we'll just have windmills everywhere, and we'll gradually just implement the progressive program, and one way or another it'll lead to socialism. And that's basically what the Communist Party USA believes. That's what Democratic Socialists of America believe. It's just, we're just gonna, that liberal Democratic Party policies are the road to socialist revolution, and it'll happen gradually, right? It's the gradual implementation of a progressive agenda. Right. Then you have another current that's a little bit closer to Marxist economics that I call workerism. And I was in the Workers' World Party for many years. This is what they believed. Shama Sawant, who's running for Congress and taking very good anti-Israel stances, anti-war stances, very admirable. I know she's going to be on Revolutionary Change podcast next week, and that's pretty cool. Shama Sawant is trying to build a nonprofit called Workers Strike Back, which is going to be a kind of an activist nonprofit that's aligned with the labor unions, right? And a lot of Trotskyist groups, Socialist Alternative, the Spartacist League, all of them, basically what they want is the labor unions, which are part of the Democratic Party machine, to become more empowered and more independent and set up their own political party, and have a political party that is run by labor unions, kind of run the government, right? And so that's closer to what Marx said, right? The working class majority, taking control of the state. That's kind of what they're talking about. But it's got a little bit of a problem, which is that in our time, we're heading toward a gig economy. Uber drivers rarely ever see other Uber drivers, and they compete with other Uber drivers for rides. And they are able to maximize their payout at the end of the day, not based on what their boss wants to pay them, but by how they're able to maneuver and manipulate to get the best rides. And they often compete with other Uber drivers, and they set their own hours, and they don't have the consciousness of a worker who's at the factory with all the other workers saying, I'm exploited by my boss. And labor union consciousness, which is largely what Marxism is based on. Karl Marx's theory was basically it's going to be the labor union movement, the wage working class majority and their labor unions that will rise up and overthrow the capitalists. That's just not present in our time. Labor unions are very, very weak in America. The overwhelming majority of people that are in labor unions are government employees. And the only reason they're in unions is because the law says they have to be in a union. Often those unions are not allowed to go on strike. Very, very few private sector workers in America are unionized. And those who are tend to be in industries that are rapidly vanishing. How many steel mills are there in America these days? Well, the ones that are around, a lot of American steel workers, I'd say almost all American steel workers are members of unions, but there aren't many steel workers left, right? All the auto workers at the big three, GM, Ford, and Chrysler, they're all members of United Auto Workers, but how many of them are left? Right. And so the idea that you're going to build the strategy for making a revolution is we're going to build up the labor unions, and the labor unions will either take over the Democratic Party or break with the Democratic Party and set up their own labor party. That's not a strategy that's going to actually, it's just not going to play out. But that's the workerism. That's what a lot of Trotskyite groups believe. And then you have Maoist groups, the Revolutionary Communist Party, and there's a bunch of little tiny ones now, the Maoist Communist Union in New York City, and the Revolutionary Student Group, and there's a bunch of them now, little tiny Maoist groups. And what do they believe? Well, they believe that basically they're Blanquists, right? That they want to seize control of the government and implement a kind of social justice agenda, right? That they believe America is a racist country. They believe that there's a lot of injustice here, which they're not wrong about. And so they're going to take over the government, and with state power, they'll correct those injustices. Well, none of that is Marxist economics. None of what you just heard there is Marxist economics. And that, it's very interesting. At the time that Marx was alive, there was a very radical figure in France called Louis Auguste Blanqui. And Louis Auguste Blanqui, he was criticized by Frederick Engels. Louis Auguste Blanqui, this is what Frederick Engels wrote. Blanqui is essentially a political revolutionist. He's a socialist only through sentiment, through his sympathy with the suffering of the people. But he has neither a socialist theory nor a definite practical suggestion for social remedies. In his political activity, he was mainly a man of action, believing that a small, well-organized minority who would attempt a political stroke of force at the opportune moment could carry the mass of the people with them and a few successes at the start and thus make a victorious revolution. Right? This guy Blanqui, he was a socialist in the sense that he cared about people. Right? He sympathized with the poor. He sympathized with people who were suffering. But he didn't have a theory about how to reorganize the economy. It was just people are suffering. And as a man of action, he was going to plot a coup and they were going to take over. And then what? Well, then they were in charge and they cared about the poor, right? That's kind of what these groups all are, right? To some degree or other. I would say the workerists are a little bit different. The Workers' World and Shama Sawant, and they're a little bit more economically minded. But most of what you can call socialism in America is Blanquism. It's a social justice liberal worldview that sympathizes with the poor, that sympathizes with people who suffer from racism or discrimination. It sympathizes with people who have a rough time. And their philosophy is we're going to get control of the government. And with the government, we're good. And once we're in charge, because we're good, we're going to make things better. Well, that's not Marxist economics. Again, that is the spirit of Marxism, right? That's the rebellion, dialectical materialism, change comes through struggle. That's not Marxist economics, okay? So why do so few Marxist groups in the West even support the existing communist governments? There are Marxist-Leninist governments in existence today, right? You got Vietnam. It's a Marxist-Leninist government, right? Socialist-oriented market economy. You got China, the Communist Party of China. They're the ruling party in China. They are Marxist-Leninists, right? You got Cuba, right? You got Nicaragua, where the Sandinistas are a Marxist party. They're the ruling party. But very, very, very few communist groups support them, right? In fact, the overwhelming majority don't. You go to DSA, you say, what do you guys think of Vietnam? Oh, that's awful. We don't support that. What do you think of China? Oh, that's an awful sweatshop. We don't support it. Oh, what do you think of Cuba? Oh, Fidel, blah, blah. Some of them support Cuba maybe a little bit, but not really. For the most part, none of them actually support existing communist governments. Why? Well, Stalin defeated Trotsky in 1928. And when Stalin defeated Trotsky, he repudiated Trotsky's theory of the permanent revolution. Stalin believed in socialism in one country, meaning that they were not dedicated to spreading communism all over the world. They were going to make Russia a prosperous socialist society, and with central planning, but they weren't committed to this agenda of spreading revolution all over the world. And communist governments largely do not emphasize the spiritual side of Marxism. Instead, they promote patriotism, the family, and community. And during the 1950s, the CIA began funding Trotskyists. They hired Sidney Hook and all kinds of former Trotskyists and followers of Max Shachtman. They promoted abstract art. They promoted drugs and counterculture. And that the color revolution apparatus was created using the spiritual side of Marxism to attack and dismantle communist governments. And the color revolutions, the overthrow of the Soviet Union, the overthrow of the governments in Eastern Europe was largely hijacking what was supposed to be the ideology of the Soviet Union, the ideology of Romania and Czechoslovakia and Albania, and weaponizing it against the government, telling all the young people to rebel, talking about how the leaders live in palaces and live wealthy while you don't have enough, pushing an ideology of destruction, pushing free love, tearing down the traditional family, etc. And that it was largely with the spiritual side of Marxism that the USA defeated Marxism during the Cold War and defeated the Marxist governments. And now, at this point, the spiritual side of Marxism is becoming almost the ruling ideology of Western countries. It used to be that, that it was kind of assumed in America that you were a Christian or you were religious to some degree or other. You might be a Jew, you might be a Muslim, but almost everybody was a Christian. And if you weren't, even people who didn't believe would fake it because that was the trendy thing to do. And I'm not saying that's right. I don't think it's right that people should be forced to pretend to believe something they don't believe. But that said, it used to be that way. Now it's not that way. Now, to be religious in many spaces is kind of a faux pas. It kind of comes across as a little bit unacceptable, and that people are kind of required to performatively virtue signal and make clear they support transgenderism, make clear they support LGBT rights, make clear that they are in favor of Black Lives Matter. And if they don't, they're looked at kind of weirdly. And that the spiritual side of Marxism, not the economics, but the spiritual side, is becoming kind of the ruling ideology. The Democratic Party, at least, has fully embraced the spiritual side of Marxism, not the economics at all. They oppose the economics completely. But this spirit of rebellion, this belief that conflict exists, that we shouldn't have any spiritual forces, that's becoming the prevailing view. And at the universities, they teach what's called postmodernism, right? Which is the belief that that deconstruction and tearing things down is the greatest thing. And this is very interesting. Marxism is a philosophy, and Marxism tears down to some degree or other a lot of notions. But Marxism seeks to build up a working class movement to seize control of the means of production. But postmodernism says there is no real truth, and that any attempt to impose a grand narrative or impose a real truth onto society is totalitarian. And so one must engage in deconstruction, tearing things down. It's that spirit of rebellion, but it takes it much further than Marx took it. Marx said, okay, we're going to tear down the old society, and the working class will rise up and seize control of society and create a new order. Postmodernism says that no, only deconstruction is good, and that all order must be torn down, right? So there's a really big gap here. A very small minority of Western Marxists stick to revolutionary defeatism, the idea that you should always oppose your own country, the imperialist, countries, Marxist economics, the idea we want a centrally planned economy, and anti-imperialism, the understanding that the rule of the world by Western monopolies and big corporations is what you're struggling against. There's a few communist groups that do believe that, right? The Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist. They are classical Marxist-Leninists. They really admire Stalin, and they stand with Russia. They stand with China. They stand with Iran. And they talk about the problem of overproduction and the tendency of the falling rate of profits. And they advocate a centrally planned economy. They're a genuine communist group. And there are a couple others that to some degree or other, hold on to the actual teachings. But it's very difficult and it's very confusing, because at the same time that they're teaching, what communist governments believe, they're also teaching a spiritual ideology, dialectical materialism, that cuts against that and says rebellion is all that exists, that seeks to, teach people to emphasize their individualism and deconstruction. And the activist spaces that they exist in do not match what the governments opposing Western imperialism are teaching, even though they might hold on to actual Marxism from the Stalin years. They're going to be in activist spaces where people are preaching something very, very different. And that, like in Britain, the Stop the War coalition that was created to oppose Bush's invasion of Iraq marched in support of the revolution against Gaddafi. Well, the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninists, great people. They called them out and they stood with Gaddafi. But, their activist spaces said, oh, wow, Gaddafi lives in a palace and he's, got an authoritarian state and we want a spirit of rebellion. And then increasingly the left is on the opposite side in international issues. And the left is emphasizing issues. Jyoti Brar was widely canceled because she said, look, I, as a materialist, as somebody who doesn't believe in anything spiritual, I can't accept the transgender thing. I don't accept it. And she wrote articles against it. Oh my goodness. She was a horrible person. I was canceled just for talking to her. So it's increasingly difficult for this very, very small minority of Western Marxists who still stick to Marxist economics. It's very, very difficult for them to continue to operate in the left. And Russiagate was the ultimate expression of that. For years, during the Cold War, the argument was conservatives said the Democrats are soft on the commies, right? The Democrats are soft on communism. The Democrats, they have an anti-war movement because they're actually agents of the evil communists of the Soviet Union. That the Democrats are advocating social programs because they actually want to set up the dictatorship of the proletariat and they're communists. It used to be that the Democrats and the left were constantly accused of being agents of Russia. And then Donald Trump ran for president in 2016, and we were all informed that Donald Trump was an agent of Russia, that Donald Trump was working for Putin. And that's why he didn't want a war in Ukraine and he didn't want to send weapons to Ukraine. And that's why he was questioning the war on terror and how effective it was. And we were all told that we should hate Trump because he's not anti-Russian enough. And it was based on a pack of lies. There was no Russia collusion. We've now got the documents, thanks to Tulsi Gabbard. It was all a pack of lies. But Russiagate ultimately broke the left's brain. You were not allowed to be an anti-imperialist and be on the left. You just couldn't do it because, the left, their argument against Trump was he was not pro-imperialist enough. They even accused Trump of, doing business with Cuba, right? And going to Cuba and violating U.S. sanctions. And they accused Trump of being too friendly to North Korea. And when Trump met with Kim Jong-un, they said, oh, he's coddling a Marxist regime. So Russiagate broke the left's brain. Another story that I will tell about how this broke a group, the group that I was in, the Workers' World Party, right? They are a group that holds on to Marxist economics. I held up two of their books. Fred Goldstein and Sam Marxey understood Marxist economics. But they have this attitude that you want to be part of the movement. And, they fully embraced the anti-Trump movement. And as I was going out of the group, they were bringing in all kinds of people from Durham, North Carolina, right? And they were bringing in all these young people from North Carolina. And I met these young people and they did not believe in Marxism. And many of them didn't even know that the Workers' World Party supported North Korea. They had no idea, right? They didn't even know it, right? All they wanted to talk about was white privilege and transgender. And, that's all they were interested in. They didn't know, they were not interested in Marxism or economics or anti-imperialism. They were just liberal activists. And shortly after I left the Workers' World Party, what happened? Well, in Durham, there was a Confederate monument and they went out and tore it down and they were on Fox News and they were on television. Workers' World Party tore down the monument, this Confederate monument, right? Very libidinal, right? They took an old, Confederate man like their father and they cut his head off. They tore it down and it was the spirit of rebellion, right? And, and so the Workers' World Party, they had their last national convention that they'd ever had. And it was called Do It Like Durham. And they brought in hundreds of these woke kids. Do it like Durham. Do it like Durham, North Carolina. And they have never had a national gathering since. Why? because they brought in those young people, and somebody accused somebody of sexual something or other, and somebody accused somebody of covering up sexual something or other, and oh my God, and rape and and they tore the group apart. And people drove, from what I understand, drove to the office in Baltimore and smashed it up with baseball bats. And there was violence between members, and they brought in this libidinal Oedipal movement, and they couldn't control it. And so the woke crowd of woke activist kids they recruited supposedly towards their tanky anti-imperialist Marxist-Leninist party destroyed the group, right? Do it like Durham. They did it like Durham, and they did themselves in, and they haven't had a national gathering ever since. And this is why Marxism and our politics right now doesn't make any sense. So that brings us to the question of, like, what are we actually doing here? Well, we are in a long-term economic crisis, and it's caused by all the things that Marx talked about in his economic theories. It's caused by the fact that we have an economic system where profits are in command, where human labor power is the source of all wealth, but yet the role of human in production is constantly decreasing, where we're having the market be glutted with products that cannot be sold. And in the age of AI, everything Marx talked about, technology advancing and making the economy more and more unstable, poverty amid plenty, poverty created by abundance, is more true than ever before. And ultimately, the way out of this is to have society come together and take control of the economy, and have an economy that works in the interests of human beings and is centrally planned, and ultimately connects us with the rising new economy around the world. And growth can be no longer restrained, right? Where human beings are unleashed to grow, and the rule of big monopolies and big corporations is broken, and we have a society where human labor power and the creativity of human beings is unleashed and invested in. We need society to take control of the means of production. Now, so how could a revolution actually happen? We've explained why the leftist groups can't give you a straight answer about it and are completely lost, right? They're just doing something different. But how could a revolution actually happen? Well, here's generally the way revolutions happen. They happen like this. Society enters a long-term economic crisis. And that's what we're in right now. Big economic crisis. Step two, the ruling class and the state apparatus, right? The people with the money, the ultra rich, and the military and the police and the intelligence, they begin fighting with each other. And as they fight with each other, they bring working people into politics as their foot soldiers, right? Some of the capitalists are aligned with Trump, and so Trump is building a movement of working people that are aligned with him to be his foot soldiers. And some of the capitalists don't like Donald Trump, so they're building a movement of people that are aligned with them. And this is called Bonapartism, when sections of the ruling class begin fighting with each other and trying to use the state to suppress each other. That's called Bonapartism. That's a natural part of the process. When you have a long-term economic crisis, it leads to divisions within the ruling class and Bonapartism. Then step number three is, as the people become politically active, they become more and more independent, and they begin to have their own agenda. And we can see a great example of this, right? There's loads of Trumpers that were brought into politics because Donald Trump and his allies were fighting with another faction of the ruling class. However, many of them said, wait, why are we going to war for Israel? They were brought into politics by Donald Trump, a blind supporter of Israel, a Zionist. But they were brought into politics to be activists for the Trumper wing of the ruling class. And in the process, they became more independent and more aware, and they began to have their own agenda. And if you look at Tucker Carlson, you look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, you look at Candace Owens, these are people that are, leading, that millions of Americans listen to. And those millions of Americans who listened to them were brought into politics as Trump was fighting against his rivals in the ruling class. But in the process of being brought into politics and reading political books and thinking about politics, they discovered a big contradiction in the America First ideology, and they became more independent. And they said, actually, no, America First shouldn't mean Israel first. They're not where we're at politically, but they took a big step towards their independence. And that is part of the process, right? That as people become politically active, they become more politically independent, more independent of the ruling class, and they begin to have their own agenda. And then what happens? Step four, a disciplined illiberal organization places itself at the center of an increasingly politicized population. So as people are waking up and getting more politically involved and saying, wow, I can do things and change the political system, conditions are getting so bad that, that I need to get politically involved on the one hand, and the ruling class are fighting with each other. So organizations are coming into existence that enable me to get politically involved. Amid all of this, a very disciplined, illiberal organization, a vanguard party, if you want to use Leninist language, comes into existence and places itself at the center of the politicized population. So as people are waking up and getting involved in politics and becoming active, there's like a very solid, dedicated organization of revolutionaries that's at the center of that. And then ultimately, the state then fractures into some kind of civil war, or there's an attempted military coup, and that illiberal organization is a decisive force on one side of the conflict. And in the process of that civil war or that military coup or whatever, that disciplined organization becomes the government. That's generally how revolutions happen. And actually, you don't have to take my word for it. There's what they call insurgency, counterinsurgency theory. Mao Zedong, the leader of the Chinese Revolution, he wrote extensively about the concept of people's war and how revolutions happen. And the anti-communist writer, the counterinsurgency, the father of low-intensity warfare for the British Empire, Frank Kitson, he also wrote extensively on this, right? And so if you read insurgency, counterinsurgency theory, basically all societies in our time are in one of three stages, right? That there's the first stage, which Mao called strategic defensive, which is called subversion by Frank Kitson. And that's where illiberal forces are isolated, divided, and mainly engaged in an intellectual conversation, meaning that there are people that are against the system. There are forces that want to move beyond liberalism, move beyond the liberal order, move beyond capitalism, but they're divided, and there's not very many of them, and they don't have a base among the population, and they engage in kind of intellectual arguments with each other. It's called strategic defensive. Frank Kitson called it subversion because he argues that what they're doing by preaching their ideas and existing, even though no one's listening to them, is they're subverting, they're subversive, right? Mao calls it strategic defensive, meaning that they don't have anything. They're on the defensive, basically, right? That's the first stage. But then, as society enters a crisis, Mao says they enter what they call strategic equilibrium, or Frank Kitson calls it terrorism. Awful term, because terrorism generally means political violence or whatever, but Frank Kitson has a different definition of terrorism than I do, and then legally exists. But anyway, and in the stage of strategic equilibrium, illiberal forces have wide support within the country, including within the power structure. And they begin exercising power. They control territory. They force concessions from the government. They are capable of shutting down the economy, and in some cases, battling state forces. Right. And, I can think about, there are various countries, for example, Lebanon, right? In Lebanon, they're in a state of strategic equilibrium. There's Hezbollah that controls big chunks of the country. They're not the government, but there's a big section of the government that's aligned with Hezbollah. And there's a big chunk of Lebanon that is run by Hezbollah. And when Hezbollah wants to harass the government, they can shut down the economy, and they have their own militia, and they can force the government to do various things, but they're not in power. They just control big chunks of Lebanon, right? That's, Lebanon has been in strategic equilibrium for decades. There's other examples of this around the world, right? In the 1930s in America, when Roosevelt was president, almost all the major cities, everyone knew the communist area. In New York City, Harlem, and big chunks of Brooklyn were communist territory. And you had communists that were elected to the city council, and you had communist unemployment councils and communist labor unions that basically ran the area. You had the sit-down strike wave, right? You could say the 1930s, the late 1930s in the United States was the beginning of strategic equilibrium in America. In various places, various parts of the world you will go to where there is a major anti-imperialist movement that controls big chunks of territory, that has sections of the government that work with them, that when they want something from the government, they have a way of shutting down the economy with a strike or shutting down the major roadways. They have their own, militias or something like that, and they can get what they want, and they can force the government to do what they want. That's called strategic equilibrium. Frank Kitson calls it terrorism. But that's called strategic equilibrium. That's when there is a vibrant revolutionary movement that represents territory and big sections of the population and has power. right? And that's a lot of countries in the world have that. The United States has not had that since the 1930s. But that's a state of being where a vibrant anti-imperialist movement has a lot of power. But they're not the government, but they have a lot of power in a country. And then step 3 or stage 3 is what they call strategic offensive in the Maoist language. And in Frank Kitzen's language, he calls it civil war. And that's where instead of having one state, right, the state cracks and breaks into two. And there's one section of the government that is aligned with the revolutionary movement, and there's another section of the government that's against it. And in that context, the revolutionary movement makes a final push to seize power. And that's generally, in terms of counterinsurgency theory, this is what they study in the Pentagon, right? This Frank Kitzen, William S. Lind, Mao, Che Guevara, that's generally counterinsurgency theory. That's what they read. They know about these 3 stages, right? In America right now, we're in strategic defensive. I'm on here preaching what they would call subversion. I oppose imperialism. I oppose their system. So I'm preaching my subversive ideas. But I mean, not many people are listening to me. Some people are listening to me. And there's other people who agree with me, who have different interpretations. And we're all just kind of yelling at each other. And there's not any territory that we control or have influence over. And there's not any big section of the population. And there's no way we can really, like, if I on here said, all right, we're going to make Trump stop this war on Iran, that wouldn't matter. I mean, we might have some good protests, but Trump wouldn't stop the war because we did anything, right? We're in strategic defensive. But if we were in strategic equilibrium, right, and there were members of Congress that were aligned with us, and there were big cities and big areas where the people were organized and under the leadership of a revolutionary movement, and we could call a general strike against this war in Iran, and Trump might be forced to stop the war because we shut down the economy because we said the war wanted to be stopped. That would be strategic equilibrium. We're not in power. We're not the government, but we have enough of a base among the population. We've become enough of a vibrant organization that we're able to actually force the state to do things that we want. We're actually in control of territory. I mean, that's strategic equilibrium. And then ultimately, strategic equilibrium leads to, what they call strategic offensive, where eventually the government breaks into two. One section of the government says, we got to completely crush the revolutionary movement. Other section of the government says, well, we kind of agree with the revolutionary movement. And as the state breaks into two, there's a confrontation. And ultimately, out of that confrontation, the revolutionary movement is able to take power. Right? That's counterinsurgency theory. That's the understanding of how revolutions happen. So where are we in America in 2026? Well, we're in a long-term economic crisis caused by the computer revolution, a value crisis of overproduction. Right? The free market system can't handle artificial intelligence. It can't. Right? And this problem of the tendency of the falling rate of profit, poverty amid plenty, poverty created by abundance, technology leading to greater poverty and economic instability. The computer revolution has created an unsolvable crisis of overproduction, a value crisis. It is easier than ever to produce wealth. And as a result, the role of workers at the assembly line is less than it's ever been. And I mean, there's no way to get out of this with profits in command. You cannot have a society where profits are in command and get out of the crisis we're in. It is urgent. The only way out of this is for the means of production, the centers of economic power, to be rationally organized. You need a government that breaks the power of the big monopolies and forces the economy to work in the interest of the people. That's the only way you're going to get out of this. And such a government would then be friendly with Russia, be friendly with China, be friendly with Iran, and trade with countries and be part of a multipolar world. We can't have the world continue to be ruled by big banks and big monopolies that are extracting super profits from all over the world. It's not working anymore. It doesn't fit with modern technology. Modern technology has led us to a state of abundance that requires us to lift the artificial restraints of the anarchy of production, of the irrational profit motive. That's what Marx wrote about. And that, again, no Marxist group can tell you that. They can tell you that it's unfair, that some people are billionaires. I mean, I explained to you why none of them think that. Right? Even though that's the Marxist economic teaching, none of them think that. All they think is tear it down, rebel, that they're doing something spiritual. In the meantime, there's a rising anti-imperialist bloc of countries that continue to grow. China just keeps growing. They've been telling us, China's going to collapse. They're not going to collapse because they have a centrally planned economy, because they don't have the anarchy of production. They have a state that rationally organizes the economy in the interests of a long-term plan of economic growth. They have problems just like any other country, but they're able to keep growing, right? You look at Russia. Putin fixed Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union by putting oil and gas under public ownership and using subsidies from the oil and gas revenue to stabilize the economy. In Russia, the economy does not function according to the anarchy of production. It functions according to what the state central planners who have the control of the oil revenue want. And that's why Russia is able to keep growing. And even as the USA has tried to barricade and shut down their economy amid the special military operation and force them into a conflict in Ukraine, they just keep growing. Right. And if you look at Nicaragua, you look at the various countries, sometimes they're able to be completely isolated. Like Cuba is really suffering right now because of the USA blockading them and not enabling them to have oil and causing them huge problems. But at the same time, Cuba has been able to keep growing over the years because they have a centrally planned economy. Vietnam, Iran with its resistance economy, there's a big section of the world that doesn't have the problem of poverty created by abundance. They've broken out of the domination of Western imperialism, and they've become able to grow because they don't have the anarchy of production. The Union of Sahel States, you look at Ibrahim Traore and what's being done in Niger and Burkina Faso and Mali, right? They have broken out of the anarchy of production. They have a state that's rationally organizing the economy to make sure they have growth, right? And in America, the population wants economic growth very badly. We want our living standard to start going up. The life expectancy of Americans are going down. We don't want that. The rate of home ownership among Americans is going down. We don't want that. We want to be able to own our own homes. Our living standard is going down. Our roads and bridges are crumbling. Our life expectancy is decreasing. Our country is falling apart. Why? Because our government works for a bunch of big monopolies and banks that want to dominate the world, and they don't care about us. And as a result, the only way the big monopolies can stabilize the economy is to keep making us poorer. And they're coming up with all kinds of crazy schemes to make us poorer. We're going to live in a pod. We're going to own nothing. We're going to eat bugs and we'll be happy about it. And, they've got all kinds of sinister plans to basically set up some kind of high-tech dark ages, some kind of low-wage police state to make their system work because there's no room for us at the assembly line. Malthusianism, the idea of overpopulation, the idea that the problem is there's just too many people, there's just too much growth, right? All of that is an attempt to stabilize their system, right? What Americans want is economic growth. What the people of the world struggling against imperialism want is economic growth. And what Wall Street and the big monopolies need is degrowth in order to save their system. The only way they can stay at the top is to drive down the population, drive down consumption, roll back the wheels of history. Technology makes their rule at the top of the world unsustainable. They can't stay at the top any longer because humanity will want to keep growing. So as a result, there's a conflict coming. So what do we do? Well, first of all, we've got to oppose the emerging low-wage police state and its wars. We got to say Iran is not our enemy, and that this war against Iran is being waged for the big multinational corporations and the Zionists and the bankers and not for the American people. We got to say that we got to protect our civil liberties, and that, when the Uhuru movement, they're going to federal court to fight for their right to freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, right? And to say that they have the right to say no war with Russia. And we got to stand up for the freedom of speech and the freedom to protest and say that students have the right to oppose Israel. And we got to stick up for people's civil liberties. And there's going to be an anti-monopoly coalition. That ultimately it's in the interest of all of society to have economic growth, but the big imperialist monopolies that dominate the United States, they can't handle economic growth. So we need to unite all the forces that want economic growth, and the way to do that is to put forward what they call a transitional program, meaning policies that could actually be enacted that oppose the agenda of the imperialists, right? The minimum and maximum program is an example of opportunism, right? When people, they give you, if you listen to these various socialist groups, they all have what they call the minimum and maximum program. The minimum program is just typical Democrat liberal stuff. And the maximum program is some crazy vision of revolution. But they don't have a transitional program, which is policies that they advocate that could be implemented that would take America out of imperialism. And if you're a serious revolutionary movement, you have what's called a transitional program. That's what we have in CPI. We have 4 points, 4 things that we advocate that are not crazy revolution, but they're not things the Democrats advocate that are just kind of liberal policies. There are 4 things we're for. 1, a mass program to rebuild this country. hire all the unemployed and have them rebuild the highways and the roads and the bridges and the universities, new power plants, high-speed railway, rebuild America with a mass public works program. 2, public control of our natural resources. Put oil and gas and coal and timber and all of the wealth of America's soil and America's natural resources into the public budget so that we can use the money that comes from our natural wealth to make the country more prosperous. Step 3, the creation of a national bank that would inject credit strategically in the interests of an overall economic plan. A national bank, a state monopoly on credit. Cancel the debt, but instead have a national bank that assigns credit as part of a plan to make the country more prosperous. And then 4th, begin to invest in our population by providing a jobs guarantee so that every person's labor power is utilized to build a stronger country, so that healthcare is provided so we can have a healthy population. Healthcare emphasizing prevention, not making money off treating people when they're sick, but preventing people from getting sick so that we have strong, healthy people going out and doing great things, providing education so that we once again have the best engineers and the best scientists in the world. And we're investing. We have a smart, educated workforce of skilled people. Now, if you enact those 4 policies, you're cutting into the power of the bankers. You're putting the private bankers out of business. You're putting the big oil monopolies and the big natural gas corporations out of business. And you're building a movement. You're providing jobs and investing in communities all over the country. And you're providing education and healthcare. You're cutting into the power of the big monopolies. Now, those are 4 policies that could be implemented. Right? It's not a crazy revolution. It's not a crazy pipe dream, but it's also not something that AOC is going to do tomorrow. These are real policies that would restructure the economy of the United States. That is called a transitional program, right? And if we are seriously organizing, we need to have a transitional program. And the slogan that we use is we need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government that is actively fighting for the working people against the big monopolies, the working families against the big monopolies. Now, that is what we ultimately need to do. We need to oppose the low-wage police state and its wars. We need to move toward building an anti-monopoly coalition, and we need to advocate a transitional program of what the United States could be like. What we should not do, number 1, is do not reinforce red team versus blue team politics. Right? It's a false polarization. The woke versus MAGA is fake. Right? There's loads of pro-Israel, pro-war Democrats that hate Trump, and there's loads of pro-war, pro-Israel Republicans that hate Mamdani. It's fake, right? It's fake, right? It's just completely fake, right? And if you reinforce the red team versus blue team, you're not helping advance anti-imperialism. It's a false polarization, and it's fake. It's completely fake. And we must not ever reinforce it. Number 2, and this is a big one, do not advocate or celebrate political violence. This is the way that they are preventing a real revolutionary movement in this country. By using this false polarization of red team versus blue team, events like the killing of Charlie Kirk, events like the alleged crime of Luigi Mangione, it's creating trauma and making people confused, getting people caught up in this red team versus blue team, getting people to hate their neighbor who disagrees with them politically. This is a counterinsurgency strategy. It's the years of lead, like in Italy with Operation Gladio. And I've written about this endlessly, the danger of an American years of lead. The way that they're trying to prevent strategic equilibrium and prevent a real revolutionary movement from emerging is by reinforcing the false polarization. The division in America right now should not be, are you in favor of gay marriage? Are you against it? Are you in favor of abortion? Are you against it? Are you a MAGA or are you a woke? That should not be the division. The division should be, our country is going to war against Iran and killing thousands of Iranians. Should we do that or should we stop it? Is that war good or is it not? Well, if it's not, you're on my team. And if you support this war, you ain't on my team. The division in our country should not be, do you have a rainbow flag? Or, the division should be, our civil liberties and our freedoms are being taken away. Are you for that or are you against it? We need a real polarization where the overwhelming majority that are against the big monopolies, who want to protect our civil liberties, want to oppose these wars, want to see the country become more economically prosperous, that majority asserts itself with an anti-monopoly coalition. We need to repolarize the working class and American majority against the big monopolies, right? And political violence, where people on the red team murder people on the blue team, or people on the blue team murder people on the red team. And, you know, and the trans people all think that, oh my God, if Trump gets elected, they're going to round up and publicly execute all trans people. And the blue team says, oh, if Mamdani, if Kamala Harris gets elected, they're going to confiscate Bibles and put all the Christians in death camps. This kind of stupid hysteria, this culture war stupid hysteria, which they're escalating with political violence. It's not enough to just tell people to hate each other on the internet. Now you have to make people physically afraid of each other with violence, right? That's not helping. And that's going to prevent a real movement from coming about. So we must oppose political violence, and we must try to build a mass populist movement that transcends the cultural and regional divides. We need a division based on, are you for the rule of the big monopolies, are you against it? Not the regional and cultural divisions. Third, we need to not demonize the population or buy into the idea that the population are the enemy or are irredeemable. That's really, really important, right? We need to not play into the idea that the American people are the enemy. We need to love the American people. We need to be the most American people you ever met. And we need to love this country. And we need to know the country like the back of our hands. We should be the most patriotic people. We should be the ones who just really, really love and know American culture in every region, every demographic. We should be the most American people ever so that we can lead the American people. Why should anyone listen to you if you don't? Why should you aspire to lead a country politically if you don't love it? Right? Think about it. Right. And we should know the American people so well and know what's important to them and know their values and all of that, and incarnate their values and express them in a way that can lead them into confrontation with the big monopolies and puts their needs and their values and their feelings up front against the interests of the big monopolies who don't care about them. Right. That ultimately needs to be what we advocate. We need to be the biggest lovers of all the American people, woke, MAGA, red state, blue state, no matter who they are. We need to know them and love them and express their feelings and show them that to really get what they want, which is a better life for their kids, a better life for their country and for the next generation, more prosperity in their communities, what they need is to stand up and oppose the big monopolies, not oppose the blue team, not oppose the red team, but oppose the big monopolies. That's ultimately what we need. And political violence isn't going to get us there. Right. And the main thing is we need to not promote degrowth, because degrowth is what they're trying to implement. Right. And this is the kind of movement we ultimately need to build. So what is going to happen in America over the next few years? Well, the demand of the population for economic growth and the monopoly's urgent need for degrowth are going to come into more and more conflict. Look, human beings want growth. It is the nature of human beings to want more than they've already had. Yet the big monopolies that rule over us, the only way they can maintain their power is with degrowth. And so there's going to be a confrontation. What next? An anti-monopoly coalition of different forces that want growth and peace and can cooperate to advance this in politics will emerge. It's already happening. All right. Ro Khanna is calling for a joint populist movement to oppose the war, despite his political limitations. Tucker Carlson has turned into a major anti-war voice, interviewing Roger Waters and interviewing Chairman O'Malley from the Uhuru movement, interviewing Jimmy Dore. Even though he's was the Fox News host, he's basically, promoting, some version of what he understands to be anti-imperialism on his show with every broadcast. Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying more and more things I agree with. Mamdani, the mayor of New York City, I was skeptical, but honestly, he's talking about arresting Netanyahu. And, there is the basis for a real anti-monopoly coalition, and it's going to naturally happen. The big monopolies will intensify their manipulations and repression. But at the same time, even the big monopolies are going to become more and more divided because the stakes are going to get higher and the crisis is going to be more intense. So amid all of this, we must build a community of resistance that functions to carry out operations and advance a transitional program. As this anti-monopoly coalition emerges, we have to be the ones pushing them towards taking power. We have to educate them about anti-imperialism And we have to put forward a program, our 4-point economic plan, as a way that they could take power. And we must build our network, our community of resistance that learns to carry out operations together, to educate people, to take care of people, to just be a network of resistance, while we advance the transitional program of what, like, real policies that could be implemented, what could be done to move America out of imperialism. And we push those ideas wherever this anti-monopoly coalition is emerging, right? And that's what we can do. And gradually, we want the anti-monopoly coalition to emerge as a major force in American politics, right? And that would be strategic equilibrium, right? Imagine there was a big chunk of the U.S. Congress that sounded like Jimmy Dore or Tucker Carlson, right? Imagine that there were areas in this country that, the politics of that area. Imagine if San Francisco became a Tucker Carlson or a Jimmy Dore or a Roger Waters type city, right? That would be strategic equilibrium if big sections of the country were part of the illiberal resistance movement, right? And what would ultimately happen is, as that became the reality and as an illiberal movement became part of the situation, different factions within the ruling elite, some within the monopolies, would just say, okay, and make peace with it and accept it. And some would become increasingly desperate and say, we need to do everything we can to just outright smash it. And when it came to a head, when one section of the ruling elite said, we're going to go outright and smash, and there's not going to be any anti-war people, and there's not going to be any populists anymore, and the other section of the ruling elite said, no, we're not going to tolerate that, and went over to the monopoly, that would be strategic offensive, and that would be a revolutionary crisis. And out of that revolutionary crisis, the anti-monopoly coalition could take power, and that could be America's road out of imperialism. And that's how a revolution could actually happen. And that's what the Center for Political Innovation seeks to do. We seek to build up an anti-monopoly coalition and put forward our optimistic vision of a pro-growth government of action that fights for working families. And we are going to oppose the false polarization, and we are going to oppose political violence, and we're going to build a network and a community of people that can carry out operations to advance the vision of what America could be beyond the rule of profits, and what an America where human beings were invested in and celebrated and cultivated could actually be like. And we're going to advance an anti-monopoly coalition and move towards a government of action that fights for working families. So I hope that people found that informative, because this is a very unique view. This is innovationism, right? And that we go against both the left and the right. The left has long ago declared that I'm a fascist and I'm an evil person for believing this. And the right, most of the right, still believes that, that capitalism and the free market is just the magical way to solve all things. But there are people on the right that are gradually coming to these kind of conclusions, like Tucker Carlson. There are people on the left that are gradually coming to conclusions like what we're saying here. Jimmy Dore comes out of the left, but look at him, right? And that gradually the anti-monopoly coalition will come into existence. But what we have to offer the anti-monopoly coalition is ideology. Most of the people that are coming into conflict with the big monopolies have no ideology. They can't explain it, right? They just, as far as they're concerned, it's like the big monopolies are bad and they're screwing us. That's all they know. We have an ideology, right? We have this, everything I just explained to you. We understand the tendency of the falling rate of profit, the problem of value crisis overproduction. We have a vision for an anti-monopoly coalition and a government of action. We understand what the BRICS countries, why they don't have the problems of the West. We understand why the West is collapsing. We have ideology. And with ideology, we must build a community of people that are dedicated to this ideology, and educate people and be part of the emerging anti-monopoly coalition. So I hope people found that informative. So I do want to remind people, I just have one other thing to talk about with you all. And then we'll do the roll call, and then I'll answer any questions that people have. So if you've got a question for me, go to buymeacoffee.com, right? And send your questions. Send your questions, go to buymeacoffee.com, or you can do a super chat, right? We're monetized. Super chats are appreciated. You can do a Rumble rant if you're on the Rumble, but send questions for the second half of the show. We really need you to do that. So yeah, I want to remind you all of that. So now just on to the next item I need to talk to you all about. So, I don't want to focus on this, because if we focus on this, this is exactly what I was saying not to do. We don't want to get caught up in red team versus blue team. All right, we don't. Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, published a document this morning, and it was about the Cuban government and its network of left-wing terrorists around the world. The document, if you read it, it was basically, it's the same thing that Biden did. When Biden was president, he became obsessed with right-wing extremism. And that was to go after all the Trump activists, all the kind of more extreme forces in the Trump activist base. Well, now that Trump is in office and Marco Rubio is running the State Department, he is going after all the activists that are in the Democratic Party's base. So this morning he published this document, which I read, not very long. And it was a list of different groups in America that are Democrat Party aligned groups that he says are aligned with Cuba. Now, CPI was not on that list, which is good because, I mean, I don't want the government to be going after us. And most of the groups on the list, if you look at the list that was published, these are groups that are Democrats. They're Democrat Party activists. And basically what it is that, Trump is president and Marco Rubio is Secretary of State, and they don't want the Democrats to effectively wage political war against them. And there are a number of communist-y, socialist-y, anti-warish kind of groups that are Democrats. And they want to, I don't know what, they want to call them bad. They may even be considering prosecuting some of them, which we would have to oppose as a matter of principle. A long list of groups: Party for Socialism and Liberation, the People's Forum, Code Pink, the Black Alliance for Peace, etc. Okay. Now, that was the list, and they published it. Some of the groups that were on there, it was ridiculous. One group that was mentioned on the list is Equality for Flatbush, which I don't even want to say too much about it. But if you know anything about that group and the people involved, I mean, that the fact they're on that list is ridiculous. It's just utterly ridiculous. That's all I'm going to say about that. But, but basically it's just kind of a list of various activist groups in America that are supposedly linked with Cuba, that are subversive or something like that. Well, it's an outrage. It's wrong for Marco Rubio to put this list out. We oppose it, but we shouldn't get confused about what this is, right? Joe Biden tried to make it anti-imperialist by going after the Uhuru movement for their ties to Russia, allegedly. And then going after Scott Ritter and stealing Scott Ritter's passport, having the FBI raid his home for his ties to Russia, right? Because the Uhuru movement has criticized and worked against the Democrat Party, because Scott Ritter has generally been a Republican, right? I mean, he's a lifelong Republican, but he's now a leading anti-war voice, very friendly to Russia. Joe Biden weaponized the Department of Justice to go after Scott Ritter, to go after the Uhuru movement, right? We stuck up for Scott Ritter. We stuck up for the Uhuru movement. Well, now that Trump is in office, Trump is using the State Department. I guess Marco Rubio is using the State Department to, at this point, just accuse. They're not charging them with any crime, to go after the Party for Socialism and Liberation, right? The Black Alliance for Peace, and some other groups that are on that list. Okay. Well, here's the thing, right? And I just want to mention this to you all, right? So, we oppose this list, and we will defend the civil liberties of everyone on that list. And we don't want to get people stoked up and paranoid about that list, because that's part of the red team and blue team. And part of it reinforces the danger. All the people on that list, PSL and People's Forum, they're all saying, oh, see, we've got to go out and fight Trump because Marco Rubio wants to throw us all in jail. It's funny. They didn't go out and fight for the Uhuru movement when Biden was trying to throw them in jail. They didn't go out and fight for Scott Ritter when Biden was trying to throw him in jail. But, they're using this list and the trauma and the fear that it generates to have the government publishing this list. They're using that to drum up their base, to reinforce red team versus blue team. We don't want to do that. And we're not on the list, right? Mainly because, we're not part of the anti-Trump movement. I mean, we oppose Trump's war, right? And at this point, I don't think Trump deserves the benefit of the doubt. If Trump was impeached at this point, we would not defend him one iota, because he's completely sold out everything good he promised. But we're not part of the red team versus blue team. But they're watching us, okay? And we got to be real about this, right? So, folks, you you know that for the last month, at least, for years really, but especially for the last month, I have been talking about this image. All right, this is a photo I've been highlighting on these streams. I've been telling the story of where this photo came from, July 4th, 1976. I've been talking about it, right? And this photo is on the cover of a CPI book. It's on the cover of a CPI book, right? We won't fight a rich man's war. It's on the cover. And I did a stream, a couple weeks ago about the story of July 4th, 1976, where this came from. And our national convention for CPI is coming up. And look, we've got that photo on the cover as our national convention. Well, folks, I just got to show you this, right? And don't freak out. We're not having a panic here. We're not, because there's no reason to panic. But let's just be real. This is page 45 of Marco Rubio's document, where he listed various groups that were aligned with Cuba from statedepartment.gov. That's that photo that I showed. I've been showing on here nonstop on these streams. It's on the cover of our book. That's the cover of our convention, is on page 45 of this document. And it doesn't have any reason to be there. There is no caption. It has nothing to do with what is written in the text. It's just randomly thrown on page 45. That's not an accident, folks. That's not an accident. They're watching us. And don't you doubt that they are watching us. They are watching us, folks. They are watching us. And we're not afraid of that, right? And yeah, but I mean, we've been talking about that image nonstop on these streams, and it has absolutely no reason to be in this document. I'll read you what's on the page. It has nothing to do with the text. This is a page about Cuba and their political allies in America and Cuba's alliance allegedly with drug cartels and all kinds of crazy anti-Cuba stuff that Marco Rubio is putting on there as part of his neocon stuff. It has absolutely nothing to do with the text, but they threw it on there. And that's because they're watching these streams. That's why they're watching these streams. They know who I am, right? I'm on RT every day, doing my job as a reporter, very proud. And they're watching this right now. And they're watching us. And even though our name is not on that list, because we're not Democrats, and that Marco Rubio isn't really trying to fight communism, and he's not really trying to fight imperialism, anti-imperialists, and he's probably doing that to some degree. Marco Rubio's main agenda is to fight the Democrats. And there are some anti-imperialist groups like the PSL and like Black Agenda Report or Black Alliance for Peace that are also, fighting, that are working for the Democrats. And he wants to threaten them, and he wants to use the State Department to go after them. Right. And so, he listed them. We're not listed because we're not part of the anti-Trump movement. It doesn't serve their partisan political agenda to go after us because we're not Democrats. But don't you doubt that they are watching us. And, every so often I get a reminder of how important what we do on these streams are. Right. It is wild. There is a whole industry to try and make us invisible. Right. And I could go into great detail about various things, but Penny remembers. I will show you the video. When we had a little workshop in Minneapolis, we had like 20 people come to our little workshop, just a little workshop. We rented an Airbnb. And this is what happened in Minneapolis. You better believe it. This is what happened when we had a little workshop in Minneapolis. I'll put the video on here. And it shows you how important we are. We're watched very, 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 very closely. This was our little workshop in Minneapolis last year. We went out to Minneapolis to do just kind of a routine, small workshop that we do in a number of cities. We've done them before, where we get together, have some classes, get to know different members, different friends. Anyhow, we get out there and we see all these crazy signs posted up all over the neighborhood. Let's not alert the membership as of yet, right? Because they want a reaction. If they see they're getting a reaction, that'll embolden them, right? We'll just be extra careful with security at the door. But honestly, I don't think we should not do the event. No, I think we should do it. I guess we'll just proceed with our meeting as usual. Okay, so the first thing is that the break time is the most important, right? The break time when we're actually talking to people. is the most important time, right? Actually, when I'm speaking and all of that, it's not that important. What's important is when we're talking with the people. On Saturday morning, our main concern was the lack of heat. The Airbnb had not turned the heat on, and it was record low temperatures. It was a very, very cold night, so we're inside the house, and we're figuring we can't really start the workshop until the heat comes on. So then we see them outside.
Burger King! Burger King! Burger King! Burger King! Burger King!
It is 8:30 in the morning.
And it's like 20 below zero.
We're gonna wake up the whole neighborhood.
Yeah.
Everyone's neighborhood's gonna hate them.
The house across the street looks abandoned or dilapidated. I don't think they're worried about fascism. They're worried about putting food on the table.
We're worried about getting the heat turned on.
Yes,
It's a little cold here. The heat hasn't been turned on in our Airbnb.
And these guys start preemptively gloating that nobody is showing up.
No, we expected to be like turning the attendees away. It's amazing. It seems like no one is coming. Wow.
Not knowing that we literally don't have heat and we're not gonna start the thing without heat. It was actually like a solid hour after they left before we got the heat. And then we had people start coming. Well, actually, I take that back. There was one gentleman they did get to try to intimidate out of attending, a disabled gentleman, which, you know, that's cool.
They shouted at him, "Don't go in there, they'll rape you."
He attended though. He was not scared of them.
Hello, Gabby.
I've seen you. I've seen you on the
Can we see
video.
what they gave you?
Hello.
Can we see what they gave you?
Warning, this is a cult. Press TV. Oh, wow. It's Dugan.
Press TV.
Oh, man. Linda LaRouche. And your name's on here, too.
Really?
Yeah.
What? Famous.
Right? You're a failed political candidate and dedicated follower of Caleb Maupin's. You know, we're inside and, like, laughing about it. The whole thing just looked completely insane. At 8:30 in the morning, in record cold temperatures, you have 15 kids out there wearing COVID masks with signs about spanking and fascism and cults. I mean, the whole thing just had to look completely insane.
What are they saying?
Maupin runs the CPI. He's a weird little guy. One of the chants that they had, which I absolutely loved, was Caleb owns CPI. He's a weird little guy.
Caleb owns the CPI. He's a weird little guy.
They're calling you weird, dancing around with signs that no one understands.
Now, I thought that was very funny.
And by the way, don't you find some of their stuff to just be plain weird?
At one point, Peter Coffin walked out among the protesters. I immediately thought of the scene in The Wizard of Oz where Dorothy wakes up and she's walking among the munchkins.
Come out, wherever you are.
Because they were all like really short in comparison to him. And it made me think that the guy on the bullhorn or one of the people that had thought of that chant, they must have been called a weird little guy at some point in their life.
You're so out of touch. You think CPUSA would be a viable force to put together a picket like this? It's amazing.
They were on the bullhorn talking about communist inside baseball.
Colt, I mean, you started in the RCP, so it's used to Colt.
Gospels were a joke even to trots.
No, we're trying to show you we care enough to tell you guys what's going on here. We want you guys to get out of the cult. We're trying to show you we care enough. No, we're trying to show you we care enough to tell you guys what's going on here. We want you guys to get out of the cult.
We are gonna have some fun with them, but we don't want to be too mean to them because there's a lot of people in this organization around the country, and I'm not gonna violate anyone's private business, but more than a handful of people that have joined CPI that have told me why they joined CPI. And they said, Caleb, you know, I was in these communist circles, I was in my 20s, and I was using drugs. I rock bottomed. You know, I screwed up, I did something wrong, and, you know, I had to go into recovery. And I realized that if I was going to get over my addiction, I couldn't keep thinking in the pessimistic, dark, hopeless way that seems to accompany communist politics in America. I had to be optimistic. And I suddenly started hearing you, and you were the only communist I could stand to listen to anymore. You were the only one that was putting out a hopeful, optimistic message that wasn't tearing people down, that wasn't preaching resentment. I believe there were people out there that are in that same category. Do you know what I honestly believe deep in my soul? I believe that there were people out there today that will eventually join CPI. Let me just put it this way. You can never say that the Center for Political Innovation or myself or Peter, you can never say that we're irrelevant. The fact that we had a small meetup was so important to some people. They woke up on Saturday morning, went out in freezing cold temperatures, and made a huge ruckus to tell everyone just how upset they were about the fact that we exist and we continue to do our work. You know, we were ready to defend ourselves, but they weren't a threat to us at all. They were kind of embarrassing, and they were kind of clowns. And I'm embarrassed for whatever organization let this happen, was involved in making it happen. And I'm also embarrassed for the people that did this protest, because you were out there making fools out of yourselves while we were inside talking about the serious issues and how to change the future of our country, how to fight against imperialism, globalism, how to fight for working families. So yeah, certainly an interesting trip to Minneapolis. I'm glad we were there, and yeah, we're gonna do a lot more workshops, let me put it that way. Yeah, so the work that we're doing is very, very, very important. It's very, 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 very important. Let's do the roll call. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? We got Penny. Woo! Penny's doing great work on her book. Good stuff. Good stuff. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Montreal. Fahikabufu. Good to see you. Right? Who else? Names and locations. Names and locations. Ryan in Kansas City. Boxing class in Utica. Joe Gutierrez in California. William in London. Samuel from the Far East. With love from Russia. Good to see you, Samuel, sir. Bay Area. Terra Preta Wild. East Bay. Good to see you. Good to see you. Alex in Brazil. Good to see you, Alex. Names and locations. Jake in Portland. Good to see you, Jake. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Names and locations. Michael in Wisconsin. Arlene in Milwaukee. Good to see you. Good to see you. Kew Gardens. Checkpoint Charlie. Good to see you, buddy. Good to see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Per Bogota, Colombia. All right. Miss me yet? Gavin, of course we miss you. No, I know what you mean. But yes, Gavin, yes, good to see you, brother. Gavin's a great guy. Robert in New Jersey, good to see you, Robert. In Washington State, good to see you in Washington State, or wherever you are. I mean, I know you're in Washington State. Brooklyn, thanks, Phil. Glad you liked it. Glad you liked it. Hope you're well, Phil. Hope you're well. Names and locations. Names and locations. Anybody else with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Anybody else? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, listen, folks. The biggest thing we got coming up is the convention. Juan from Tucker, Georgia. The biggest thing we got coming up is our national convention in Chicago. That'll be August 15th. So go ahead and register. The link is down below in the description. I'll drop the link in the chat. And I'm going to start answering people's questions. But before I do that, there's actually a very, very good video. I edited it, but Noah did it. I asked Noah to do a video about North Korea and CPI, how we have been out there supporting North Korea for so long. So I want to show you, this is Noah's video. I put it up on the channel. But yeah, we're going to put on, this is Noah's video that he did about CPI and how we have a record of standing in solidarity with North Korea. And we've done a lot of work for North Korea. So this is Noah's great video.
Recently, this article was published in the Wall Street Journal admitting to the tremendous economic growth that is happening right now on the Korean Peninsula, in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, in North Korea, which has sparked a profound amount of new interest in the DPRK. And it's worth pointing out that no group has done more to promote the truth about the DPRK and to stand with them, to stand with the people of Korea in America, than the Center for Political Innovation. Even before the Center for Political innovation was founded. Caleb Maupin, our founder, was leading rallies in New York City to oppose the disgusting propaganda film Red Dawn while Occupy Wall Street was happening, waving the North Korean flag and storming into the AMC movie theater to make the point that Red Dawn was a disgusting propaganda film that made it seem as if the Koreans were a warlike people that wanted to attack the United States, when in reality, the Korean people have suffered like no other people under the boot of U.S. imperialism, have seen their country divided, and that the people of Korea do not want the United States occupying the southern half of the Korean peninsula. A year later, when Caleb went to Quito, Ecuador for the World Festival of Youth and Students, he was able to meet with young people who were part of the Kim Il-sung youth. And he talks about how meeting young people from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, meeting professional revolutionaries, was a life-changing experience for him. And it started him on the journey that would lead him to founding something like the Center for Political Innovation, as he saw Americans who called themselves anti-imperialists refusing to do the work that is so important. In 2023, we at the Center for Political Innovation were outside the White House with a huge banner that read, "Finish what Trump started. Peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula." And later that year, we sponsored the New York City Peace March with Manhattan Family Church. We attended the World Youth Festival in Sochi, Russia in 2024, and when we did, we published a special book about peace on the Korean Peninsula and the opportunity for a peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula, a journey of hope. And when we spoke at an official UN press conference beforehand, raising the Uhuru case, we also talked about our hopes for the Korean Peninsula. I, in fact, personally was involved in that.
Noah Shank, he will speak from there.
Hey everybody, my name is Noah Shank, and one of the reasons that I am so excited to be able to join the World Youth Festival is that we will be able to meet with youth from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Right now, it is illegal to travel to the DPRK under US law, and that's really unfortunate in light of the escalations on the Korean Peninsula. We have to remember that the DPRK is a nuclear-armed country, and these escalations, they could be very dangerous. That's why I think it's so important that, in combination with the fact that I, as a Korean American, feel a deep kinship with the Korean people, and I want to see them joined, that's why it's so important for us to meet with them. We've published a book to give to them, and we want to really show them that there are Americans in the United States who do not hate the North Koreans. Not only do we not hate them, but we respect them. We admire their revolutionary tradition. We admire how they showed support for the Palestinian people in their struggle for liberation. We admire how they welcomed the Black Panther Party into their country and showed support for Black liberation and for the liberation struggles around the world. It's just going to be a real honor to be able to meet with them.
Thank you very much.
During the World Youth Festival in Sochi, one of our members spoke on a panel with representatives from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, where they talked about the future of youth movements in the world and the role that youth can play in a world beyond US-backed globalism, imperialism. During the 2024 elections, we held our Peace MAGA campaign, going outside of Madison Square Garden and going outside of Trump's inauguration, which was featured in a number of major media outlets as we stood there with 10-foot banners that read, "Only peace will make America great again." It had a banner of Trump and Kim Jong-un shaking hands. And there was a touching moment where Koreans gathered around it as we handed out pamphlets about our vision for a world beyond US-backed globalism, imperialism. More recently, we have started distributing a pamphlet en masse which tells the story of Kim Il-sungya, a flower that grows exclusively in the DPRK and was originally a symbol of the friendship between the people of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and of Indonesia, and how we would love to see a day when Americans could have access to such a flower, when sanctions on the DPRK are lifted. We also do weekly Juche study groups and have recently published Juche for American Workers, which hopes to educate Americans about the ideology of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And as anti-imperialists, we also see within our own ideology of innovationism aspects of the Juche ideology, and we draw on the Juche ideology in many ways. Both of our ideologies have come out of the legacy of Marxism and of Marxism-Leninism and what communism and the anti-colonial struggles of the 20th century meant to the people of the world. But we also go one step further. Although we acknowledge Marxism as a part of our heritage, we speak to the aspects of human beings as a creative species. Kim Il-sung said that human beings are unique and that we are social beings who embody the spirit of creativity. And we, as innovationists at the Center for Political Innovation, very much believe that as well. We also strive for a strong and independent country that can stand for its own, beyond the system of globalism, imperialism, and the bankers that have kept us poor. So if you are interested in solidarity with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, if maybe you've read this article at the Wall Street Journal, or you've read articles that admit the amazing economic gains that the people of Korea were able to achieve for themselves. For example, the BBC article, which mentions the economic miracle that happened on the Korean Peninsula. If you have come to understand the lies that have been told to us by US media about the people of Korea, then you may want to consider joining the Center for Political Innovation, because if there is an organization in the United States that is the DPRK solidarity organization, it is the Center for Political Innovation. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, that was a great video that Noah did, just kind of reviewing. I mean, we are out there. I mean, you know, that video of Penny going out with the Kim Il-sung pamphlets, the weekly, every week. Tomorrow night on this channel, we're going to do another Juche study group. It'll be number 12. We've done 12 Juche study groups already. We are very, very consistent in our support for the people of North Korea and their struggle for peaceful reunification and against sanctions and war. No other organization has done what we have done. I'm very proud of that. And that relationship, you know, that effort that we have made to stand with the North Koreans, that is something I'm really, really, really proud of. I'm really, really proud of. So yeah, retweet this video if you have a chance. Please retweet it. You know, yeah, it is beautiful what we have done. It's very, very beautiful what we have done. And we're not ashamed of it. You know, North Korea is a country that has been isolated and has been subject to so many threats of war and sanctions. And they're now very close to Russia. And they're a very key part of Russia's special military operation. And, you know, we need Americans to respect them and study their ideology. You know, and we need Americans to teach the truth about who they are. And we have been doing that. You see Penny and Gabby and Noah going out there, the LA group, the LA branch, they go out with the Kim Il-sung booklet all the time, and they do outreach on the street. They do great work. And, you know, I mean, we have a record of standing with them. We're going to have the Juche study group tomorrow night. Tune in. It's going to be downright awesome. We're doing it. We're building a real community of resistance, and come to our national gathering. So our national gathering, August 15th in Chicago, it's going to be great. And the spies from the State Department who come, because they're already using our graphic in their State Department file, you know, you're welcome as well. You know, joking, of course, but you know, whatever. But anyway, you know, on that note, so we are going to start answering questions. So there's a Rumble, there's a Buy Me a Coffee that's come in, and there's also a what do you call it? A Buy Me a Coffee, and there's also been a Rumble rant. And so I'll answer both of those, but I also want to remind people, if you got any questions for me to answer, please send them. The night is young, as they say. You know, so go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. Do a Rumble rant or whatever. Yeah, we do need your support as we get ready for the convention, and you know, supporting these streams is very, very helpful. So on that note, I guess the Buy Me a Coffee question was anonymous, and I have a feeling these are coming from the same person, because he does very, very long anonymous questions. He said, "We see through the times the U.S. tried to court Saddam's Iraq, Gaddafi's Libya, and even Saddam's al-Bashir or Vietnam, but never Iran. Why is it Iran and North Korea have never been seriously courted like that? Why did they court those countries? That's not true. I mean, with Iran, they did court Iran. I mean, look at Iran-Contra, right? I mean, there was, about halfway through the Iraq-Iran war, the USA pivoted toward hating Iraq. And in the 90s, the USA was quite close to Iran. With North Korea, North Korea, they haven't, because they're still at war with North Korea. I mean, the USA and North Korea are still technically at war. The USA has never signed a peace treaty with North Korea. There are no diplomatic relations, and the USA killed 3 million people in North Korea during the Korean War. North Korea is still technically at war with the United States. So that's why North Korea, there hasn't been. But with Iran, there has been. In the 90s, the USA got very close to Iran. Iraq was America's main enemy in the late 80s and early 90s. You read about Iran-Contra. The USA was supplying missiles to Iran, arms for hostages thing with Hezbollah. And, about halfway through the Iraq-Iran war, America switched sides. America was originally with Saddam Hussein against Iran at the beginning. And then America was ultimately trying to weaken both of them. Right. And that was the thing, is that, all of these countries, they never really trust them, but they will manipulate them against each other and play games, which is what they're always trying to do. And that was a big part of Brzezinski's strategy. Right. Brzezinski's strategy was, instead of just opposing all the anti-imperialists and communists, let's play games and be friendly to some here and oppose some here and make it so it's confusing and no one knows who's on what side. And if you look at the very end of the Cold War, the early Cold War, the 50s, the early 60s, it was America against the communists. All the communists were together and America was against them. And the communists were winning. The late Cold War, they say communism peaked in 1978. That was the height of global communism's influence. But, the late Cold War, as the USA started losing, as the USA started winning and the Soviet Union started losing in the 80s, it got very confusing, right? It wasn't America against the communists. It was the communists against the other communists, and some of the communists being supported by America and some of the communists being supported by the Soviet Union, and some of them switching, and it's not clear who was against who, right? And, you had countries like Ethiopia, right? In Ethiopia, you had the Derg, which was the Soviet-backed military junta that took power, that was battling against the Eritrean Marxist-Leninist group that was originally backed by the Soviet Union, but then was backed by China against the Derg. And eventually it was the Albanian communists that took over and, delivered Ethiopia into the hands of the United States. And you had Angola, where originally it was Portugal and the United States versus the MPLA. And then it became Portugal versus the MPLA and the MPLA versus UNITA. And then Portugal withdrew from Angola and the MPLA became the government, and the MPLA battled UNITA for 25 years of civil war. And there were many examples of this where, it was making anti-imperialism confusing. There's a story that, after the, after the Vietnam War, you had the Kampuchea War of 1978, where Cambodia attacked Vietnam, and Vietnam then invaded Cambodia. Pol Pot was the leader of Cambodia. Pol Pot was aligned with China. He was claiming to be a Maoist communist. Vietnam was aligned with the Soviet Union. And it turns out America was funding Pol Pot. And that, there's a story of a Vietnam vet who says, they sent me to Vietnam and told me I was going there to fight communists. But now I find out that America is arming the Cambodian communists to fight against the Vietnamese communists. And the Cambodian communists are aligned with the Chinese communists, and they're backing the Cambodian communists, who America is also backing, because the Vietnamese communists are aligned with the Russian communists. Yeah, and it was very confusing. And that's how the USA won the Cold War. And that's a really important point for people to understand. The late Cold War was so goddamn confusing. Nobody knew who was on what side, and America won by default. It's a lot like the Years of Lead in Italy, where they got the anti-establishment forces so confused that the establishment won by default, right? America was widely hated around the world, was considered U.S. imperialism, but the forces resisting it were so confused and at each other's throats, and the USA was playing games And as a result, the USA started to winning. And by the late 80s, the USA was in control. It's Operation Gladio. Exactly. And that's what was going on there. And that, it's important to be clear on that. And that's what they're doing now to anti-establishment forces. And they're using events like Luigi Mangione, like the murder of Charlie Kirk. They want to traumatize and confuse people that would be against the establishment. All right. Point 2. How does the ruling class decide whether or not to court a country for détente? Well, it's based on their own strategic calculations, but there's big divisions among them. That's clear. I mean, when Jimmy Carter established diplomatic relations with Vietnam or with China, there was a huge campaign against him doing it. The John Birch Society and others, and a big section of the ruling class opposed it. And when Obama went to Cuba, a big section of the ruling class opposed him doing that, right? And the Iran nuclear deal. They flew in Netanyahu to give a speech to the Congress opposing that, right? This is what the ruling class fight among themselves about all the time. There are divisions among them over these kind of questions, but it's based on their own kind of calculations. It's based on what they think is in their short-term interest, but it's also based on their own economics. I mean, part of the reason Russia is so hated by the Democrats is because Russia is a competitor with big oil. They sell oil and gas on the international markets. Part of the reason China is so hated by Republicans is because China is a competitor with industrialists, right? China produces huge amounts of steel and China produces computer technology. And so the computer technology people see China as a competitor and they are Republicans and they want harder policies against China. The oil monopolies, they see Russia as a competitor and they want harder policies against Russia. I mean, at the end of the day, they both want to destroy them both, but it's a matter of an agenda. One of the biggest advocates of Nixon going to China was David Rockefeller. Why? Because China doesn't have oil and the Soviet Union was not China's friend and China would buy oil from America. And so when Richard Nixon went to China, David Rockefeller wrote a big op-ed for the New York Times and said it was a great thing. And it was just, my vision, but it was ultimately he wanted to sell oil to China and he wanted to use China against the Soviet Union. And that's what they did, right? And that these divisions are often about that, right? Trump is interested in being closer to North Korea. Part of that, I think, is that Trump is hoping that he can use North Korea against China, which is not going to happen, right? China and North Korea are very, very close. But I think that Mike Pompeo, in particular, believed he could use North Korea against China. But also, North Korea is in Asia, right? It's on the other side of the world. And, it's not near the Middle East, right? Trump is focused on the Middle East. He hates Iran. He wants to support Israel. Well, North Korea is in Asia. It's on the other side of the world. Whereas, Obama seemed really dedicated to wanting to overthrow the North Koreans, right? Under Obama, they had the movie about, that they did about, killing the North Korean leader, the interview with Seth Rogen. And, under Obama, that Hollywood was just churning out anti-North Korean movies constantly. And Obama was putting more weapons, etc. And you saw under Biden, they escalated the attacks on North Korea under Biden, right? Under Biden, the USA put a nuclear weapon in South Korea and did all kinds of stuff under Biden. So, under Biden, it seemed like, the Republicans want a better relationship with North Korea. The Democrats don't. And it's probably just based on rival strategies. It's probably based on who can make money. One of the biggest supporters of better relations with North Korea was Jim Rogers, the investor who lives in Singapore. He was on Fox News saying, I want to invest in North Korea. I can make me some money. Well, he's a Republican, and he wants to invest in North Korea. So there you go. All righty. Number 3, do you think there'll be détente during Trump's second term? No. No. Look at the world right now. It looks like the war in Iran is really escalating right now. The peace talks with Russia are not going anywhere. I think that this system is addicted to war in ways that, are beyond any division in the ruling class, like Rosa Luxemburg warned us about. This is the warning from Rosa Luxemburg. I've quoted it many, many times. It's so telling. Rosa Luxemburg, the German anti-war activist who was thrown in prison and ultimately was murdered, gave her life opposing World War I. She made this prediction. She said, This world war is a regression into barbarism. The triumph of imperialism leads to the annihilation of civilization. At first, this happens sporadically for the duration of a modern war. But then, when the period of unlimited wars begins, it progresses towards its inevitable consequences. The triumph of imperialism and the collapse of all civilization, as in ancient Rome, depopulation, desolation, degeneration, a great cemetery. This economy is so reliant on war as a stimulus, as a stabilizing force, that it doesn't matter, what somebody wants. And that's frightening, but that's the reality. So are there streamer bros beefing with Peace and Freedom member? I don't get why groups like those split from you. They claim crazy things saying you are a hanger and millennial failed Gen Z. I don't know what you're talking about. Look, there are various streamers who don't like me because social media, the nature of social media is that it's a competition, right? If all you're trying to do is make your money off social media, they'd all rather you were watching them and not me. Right? I'm trying to build an organization. What has been a real boon, I should say, a benefit for CPI, is that I don't get my primary income from social media. So that enables me to, I get some income from social media. It all goes back into CPI. And because of that, I'm not reliant on this, and I can focus on making this an organizing vehicle. Unfortunately, some of the streamer bros, a lot of them, all of their income comes from social media. That's their job. And so they urgently need to get those views up. They need people watching them and not watching somebody else. So that's kind of how they are. There's some other sinister stuff going on, right? And we don't need to get into that. We've gotten into that way too much on these streams. And, there's obviously some forces that I think are out to get us for more sinister reasons than just, competitiveness. But we don't even need to talk about that. Why is it that parties that believe the same thing on paper will split? Why let our enemies teach us who to hate? Well, it's not that simple, okay? In terms of actual Marxist parties, they don't believe the same thing. They vaguely believe in the same concepts, but often they're on opposite sides, or they have very, very different tactics that they advocate and want to use. That's that. But when it comes to people that have the same message, the kind of the beefing and the rivalries among anti-imperialists, especially on social media, are not productive. And I believe that there is, it's years of lead. They want to manipulate us against each other and confuse us. So thanks for asking. All righty. And then the Rumble rant that came in. The Rumble rant, there's two of them, one from Penny and one from Hempcar. Hempcar says, have you ever heard of these books? The Triumph of Evil by A. Murphy. Never heard of it. Fraud, Famine, and Fascism by Douglas Tuttle. I've heard of that. I've heard of that book. It's about, about the way the narrative of Stalin starved the Ukrainians, originated with Nazi collaborators. And yeah, that's what that's about. And then the other one is, Endless Holocaust. I have not heard of that one. We Are the Bad Guys, Michael Lester. I have not heard of that one. I've heard of one of those books, The Fraud, Famine, and Fascism by Douglas Tuttle. I know the Tuttle book, which is one of the pro-Stalin books that's popular in some of the circles I know. But all the other ones I'm not familiar with. And then Penny said, China sees fewer sandstorms. All we get is forest fires. Can we take care of our forests? And then she sent a video about, it's about anti-desertification efforts in China. So we'll put that on. Why not, right? We'll put on that video. We'll sure do that thing. All right. Here we go. We'll put on Penny's video. All right. That's good. That's good. Penny watches a lot of the anti-imperialist media and keeps up with things like this. So that's good. That's good. We'll put the China forest fire video on. If anyone has any more questions, please send them. Go to Buy Me a Coffee. If not, I may have to wrap this up soon. But if you got more questions, send them. I've got a little bit left in me. I am getting a little tired. My voice is starting to fade. So, but yeah, if you can send any questions, go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin or send a super chat. Super chats are appreciated. Yeah, we'll put on Penny's video. It's from a CGTN broadcast about China's war on deserts. All right, China deserts. All right. And we'll put it on. We'll put it on, and then I'll answer any more questions that come on. So here we go. China deserts. Just waiting for it to come up on my screen. For some reason, it always takes a long time for these videos to come up on my screen. But there you go. All right, here's China deserts. That was a very, very inspiring video. Thank you for that, Penny. Thank you very much. All right. All right. Any last questions for people to ask? Yeah, the Center for Political Innovation is marching ahead. Go and become a member, sign up on the website, register for the convention. It's going to be very, very awesome. We need to build a movement in this country. We need to build our movement. I just gave an opening slideshow presentation explaining our vision for building a movement. And yeah, dare to struggle, dare to win, folks. We're doing the best that we can, and we're very proud of what we're doing. And I've got a lot going on. Great things are happening. So thank you, everyone. Yeah, so I guess we'll put on the closing music and we'll call it a night. So thanks, everybody. It's been fun. And yeah, I'll be back. Tomorrow night, we're having Juche's study group at 10 p.m. Eastern. So that's tomorrow night. Wednesday, I'll probably be back on here. So here we go. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.